Hello everyone. There it goes. This is from Knowledgia.
One of the unusual and curious conflicts.
I didn't say anything. You shush. This is why did France invade Mexico in 1862? So, we're going to let him explain to us why they did it. I mean, I obviously know, but, you know, just for you guys, I want you to find out.
In history was the unexpected and theatrical French invasion of Mexico. Before we get into this peculiar timeline, we must first take a look at what led up to it. Back in the 1850s, Mexico had become entrenched in a civil war. Benito Juarez, a liberal reformist, and his supporters were at odds with Felix Zuulaga's conservatives, with the neighboring United States throwing their support behind the former. During this time, Mexico had been deeply indebted to multiple foreign powers, but as Juarez rose to authority, he put a pause on all payments for 2 years.
I'm wondering if Juarez, Mexico is named after him. More than likely, yes, but I'm just asking. I'm just saying. I don't know what I'm doing.
As there wasn't much of an alternative option for Mexico at the time. This was deeply dissatisfying for the Europeans, who were owed money by the Mexicans nevertheless. So, on October 31st, 1861, the governments of Great Britain, France, and Spain met in London to discuss possible reactions to the new Mexican government's decision. The ultimate conclusion was that a tripartite agreement would be necessary, as would joint intervention into Mexico to retrieve the money that the three nations were owed. This agreement was eagerly signed by all, but at this time, no one had yet realized that France had an ulterior motive. France was currently under the command of Napoleon III, and this was a man motivated by more than just money. Napoleon instead wanted to
Apartments.com makes searching so easy. You might just fall into the right pet-friendly...
Napoleon instead wanted to expand the influence of his empire, and this was simply the perfect excuse to see if Mexico could become part of that influence. Again, though, this was not known to either Spain or Britain, at least not yet. Throughout December of 1861, the Europeans would all make landfall at the port of Veracruz, but from there, chaos began to erupt. At first, the intention was for the three European powers to work together to take Veracruz and force the Mexican government into talks so a real solution could be found for the debt disaster. The tripartite nations insisted that they had no intentions of conquering Mexico or anything of the like, but Juarez was strongly resistant to their presence. His conservative opponents, on the other hand, were actually somewhat welcoming to the Europeans, as they viewed this as a possible advantage in their fight against the reformists. Nonetheless, by the start of 1862, it was becoming clear to the Europeans that one amongst their ranks may not be on the same page. By January, France had begun to float the idea of establishing a monarchy in Mexico, but this was shot down by Britain and Spain, and it was not yet clear to the latter two how serious the French really were. In fact, in February, the Europeans reiterated that they recognized the current Mexican government as it was, and were only there to discuss the issue of unpaid debt. The Convention of La Soledad was then signed and later ratified by the Mexican government. Negotiations shortly began, but they would fall apart by spring, as the French were now clear about their aims and would not compromise on anything else. Now realizing that they had been duped, Britain and Spain arranged their own agreements with Mexico and withdrew their troops altogether. Contrarily, France put the pedal to the medal. The French had already taken multiple cities such as Cordoba, Orizaba, and Tehuacan, and a declaration of war was issued as they continued to push further. They would eventually get held up at Puebla after multiple attempts to seize the city were repeatedly repelled by the Mexican defenders. One of these Mexican victories, on May 5, 1862, is still celebrated today, recognizing the valiant effort of the Mexican forces that inflicted nearly 500 casualties against the French as compared to only about 230 killed, wounded, or unaccounted for Mexican troops. Promised French reinforcements came much later than expected, which had pushed the French back from Orizaba to Amozoc and beyond, until their backup finally arrived. Now, the French advance could continue, and they were slowly regaining the upper hand. France would eventually take Puebla after all, and they would soon capture Mexico City as well. Finally, on July 10, 1863, the French had achieved their goal, and a proclamation of empire was issued, officially establishing a Mexican monarchy. Hoping to appease not only the strongly religious local conservatives, but also the Austrian Habsburgs with whom France had not always been on great terms, Napoleon invited the Austrian Archduke, Maximilian, to become the new Emperor of Mexico. Maximilian wasn't necessarily excited about this proposal, nor was he actually as conservative as the locals were hoping for, but the Austrian eventually succumbed to the pressure from France and accepted. Just across the border, however, the United States was neither satisfied with the current endeavors. Having a powerful European puppet next door was at the detriment to the US's sphere of influence, and the Secretary of State issued a clear statement of disapproval, although nothing more would be done for now, due to the ongoing civil war in the States. Furthermore,
I do know that I think it was near the end of the Civil War. The talk was, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong. You might know this. I think the Confederates and the Union had talked about ending the war. I think they were, this from the Confederate standpoint, they were like, we'll be Confederate, you be Union, do our thing, but we'll team up and we'll go into Mexico and eliminate France and get Mexico back on track. That was one of those things that was kind of thrown out, just like, hey, look, let's end our war, right? And let's help Mexico. And I want to say it was quickly thought of as, why don't we finish our thing before we go helping someone else with their thing? If you know,
President Lincoln was determined not to take any chance of dragging France into the war on the side of the Confederacy. Luckily for the Americans, as the U.S. Civil War came to an end, so would Napoleon and Maximilian's luck. It didn't take long for the conservatives to realize that Maximilian was much too liberal for their liking, and Napoleon had failed to prepare the Austrian for the role at hand with this fact in mind. For the liberals, though, Maximilian was no better. He was just a French puppet that they could never trust. Not only this, but the French public back home was growing more and more upset with their nation's involvement so far off in Mexico, which was costing France more than it seemed to be worth. The US was also becoming braver now that the Civil War had come to a close, and despite the Secretary of State maintaining the nation's stance of disapproval without action, two generals, Philip Henry Sheridan and Ulysses S. Grant, decided to take matters into their own hands. They began to offer secret aid to the liberal troops in Mexico, mainly along the Texas border. With
I didn't know that.
all of this in his favor, Juarez began to lead his men back into direct conflict with the French and their local supporters. Finally, Napoleon realized that his time...
I didn't know that about Sheridan and Grant sending in help on their own. I didn't know that.
Dad!
You didn't. When the cops get here, you have to be gone. You ate them. I believed you had to. You were born this way.
I thought I was the only one.
It's very interesting.
Realized that his time was up here, and his goals had been achievable, but short-lived.
Okay. Sorry, it's, my internet's not catching up, so it's all blurry. And it's annoying me. Unless my internet's out, which is a possibility. Come on. No, my
Direct conflict with the French and their local supporters. Finally, Napoleon realized that his time was...
Okay. Bear with me. It's my internet, my fiber optics, which is good, but then it does this stuff every now and then, and it annoys me. It didn't fix anything.
And his goal...
You didn't fix anything. Really? Come on.
One of the unusual and curious...
It's worse. I don't know. We'll find out. I think it's worse.
Mexico and return to safety in Austria.
Let me go back a little bit more. Sorry. Bear with me.
States to refrain from such actions was heeded nonetheless. With the liberal troops closing in, the US at their backs, and France on their way out the door, Maximilian was advised to leave Mexico and return to safety in Austria. Either for pride or naive optimism, Maximilian chose to remain in his crumbling empire and sealed his Mexican...
Come on. Why are you acting like this?
Crown is not known for certain, but caution from the United States to refrain from such actions was heeded nonetheless. With the liberal troops closing in, the US at their backs, and France on their way out the door, Maximilian was advised to leave Mexico and return to safety in Austria.
Okay.
Either for...
Why won't this just... Trying to get it back to where it was
from the United States to refrain from such actions was heeded nonetheless.
Okay,
with the liberal troops closing in, the US at their backs, and France on their way out the door, Maximilian was advised to leave Mexico and return to safety in Austria. Either for pride or naive optimism, Maximilian chose to remain in his crumbling empire and sealed his own fate. After being betrayed by one of his trusted colonels, who opens the gate at La Cruz to grant the offensive liberal forces entry, Maximilian was taken into custody, and after a symbolic trial, the first and only emperor was sentenced to death. On June 19, 1867, the monarch and his loyal generals were prepared for execution by firing squad. Maximilian, content with the decision he had made and the consequences he would now suffer, handed each member of the firing squad a Maximilian door before pointing to his heart and inviting them to aim well and aim right here. His final words were recorded as follows: Mexicans, persons of my rank and origin are destined by God either to be benefactors of the people or martyrs. Called by a great part of you, I came for the good of the country. Ambition did not bring me here. I came with the best of intentions and sincerest wishes for the future of my adopted country and for that of my soldiers, whom I thank before my death for the sacrifices which they have made for me. Mexicans, may my blood be the last which shall be spilled for the welfare of this country, and if it should be necessary that its sons should still shed tears, may it flow for its good, never by treason. Long live independence. Long live Mexico! With those final words of hope, the unlucky Austrian and his men were put to death. Maximilian would soon be laid to rest in his home country of Austria, and with this, the French invasion of Mexico had finally come to an end. Though unusual, and in the eyes of many unjustified, this brief intervention and establishment of the Mexican Empire as a French puppet state was nevertheless a fascinating and important time in history. And of all the battles and wars fought throughout time, this may be one of the most intriguing.
That was pretty good. That was really good. Sorry about the issues, but I can't do the kind of glitchy, blurry thing. Every now and then I'll get a bunch of videos up in a browser, and then I'll record one, I'll cancel the tab, go on to the next one, and I hit play and it's blurry, and I got to stop the video, refresh everything, and then start playing. And I've had some that have done that to me before. It's very annoying. But the video's over. So we're going to go ahead and end this video. And I'll just go ahead and leave you with a nice little random phrase of the day. And that is, if you're going to wear a cheerleader outfit, wipe twice. That's for you to figure out, not me.